Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Derek Marsh had always believed that the wilderness could be understood through data. 15 years with the National Park Service had taught him that every mystery in Olympic National Park, every disappearance, every unexplained incident, eventually revealed itself as human error, animal behavior, or simple misfortune dressed in theatrical coincidence. At 32, he had built his reputation on methodical analysis, on being the ranger who never panicked, who never jumped to conclusions. His supervisor called him the machine with equal parts admiration and concern. Derek wore it as a badge of honor. The Hoh Rainforest Ranger Station smelled of cedar and old coffee on the morning of October 14, 2011. Derek sat at his desk reviewing the incident report that had come through at 0600 hours. Lauren Hartley, 22, UC Berkeley student, reported missing by her hiking partner after failing to return to their campsite on the Hoh River Trail. Last seen at approximately 1800 hours yesterday, heading upstream toward the junction with the High Hoh Trail at elevation 1,240 feet. Standard protocol dictated a methodical grid search beginning at first light. Derek pulled up the digital topographic map on his aging Dell computer. The screen flickered. The station's generator had been acting up lately. He traced the trail with his finger, noting the coordinates in his moleskin notebook with precise handwriting. The Hoh River Trail ran 17 miles through old-growth temperate rainforest, Sitka spruce and western hemlock rising 200 feet overhead, their branches draped with club moss like funeral shrouds. The trail followed the glacial river eastward toward Mount Olympus, elevation 7,980 feet, its peak perpetually shrouded in cloud. His radio crackled. "Derek, it's Rachel. I'm at the trailhead with the reporting party. You should hear this." Derek grabbed his pack, already prepared with his Garmin GPS unit first aid kit, trail maps, emergency shelter, and his well-worn copy of the Olympic National Park SR Protocols Manual. He stepped outside into the October dampness. The air tasted of decay and fecundity, that peculiar scent of the temperate rainforest where everything grew and rotted simultaneously. Fog drifted between the enormous trunks like something with intention. Rachel Yoshida stood at the trailhead with a young man Derek recognized as Connor Webb, Lauren's hiking partner. The kid looked wrecked. Red-rimmed eyes, hands shaking around a paper coffee cup. 23 at most, wearing North Face gear that still had creases from the package. "Tell Ranger Marsh what you told me," Rachel said. She was a seasonal ranger, sharp and competent, but Derek could see the unease in how she held herself. Connor swallowed. Lauren wanted to find it, the place where they died. Derek flipped open his notebook. Who died? The Japanese workers. The logging crew. She'd been researching it at the university library. Said there was an accident in 1974, that 12 men were killed in a logging operation near the High Hoh Trail, but the details were suppressed. She had photocopies of old newspaper articles, stuff from the Port Angeles archives. She was writing her anthropology thesis on industrial accidents in immigrant communities. Derek's pen paused above the paper. "I'm not familiar with this incident." That's what she said, that nobody talks about it. She found records showing that Yamato Timber Company had a contract to clear sections of the forest before the wilderness designation was expanded. Something went wrong. The company closed down operations immediately afterward, paid settlements to the families, but the specifics were never made public. Lauren wanted to find the site, said she had narrowed it down to somewhere between miles 11 and 13 on the Hoh River Trail. "And you let her go off alone?" Derek's voice remained neutral, but Connor flinched. "She insisted. Said she'd only be gone an hour, just wanted to scout upstream before dark. I stayed at camp. When she didn't come back by 8, I went looking, but..." He gestured helplessly at the forest. "It's so easy to lose the trail in the dark. I called for her until midnight, then hiked out at first light to report it." Derek looked at Rachel. "Get the incident report filed with Chief Ranger Sullivan. I'll head up to mile 11 and begin the search there. We'll need a full SAR team if I don't locate her by 1400 hours. Rachel nodded, but Derek caught her expression. It wasn't concern, it was recognition, like she'd heard this story before. The Hoh River Trail was a tunnel of green. Derek walked with the methodical pace he'd perfected over 15 years, eyes constantly scanning, noting disturbed soil, broken branches, anything that might indicate passage. His Motorola radio remained silent on his hip. Cell service didn't exist out here. Wouldn't for years. 2011 was a different era, before smartphones made everyone feel perpetually connected. Derek preferred it. Connectivity created illusion of safety. At mile 7, he passed a group of backpackers heading out. College kids moving with that casual certainty of people who believed nature was benign. Derek asked if they'd seen Lauren, showed them the photo Connor had provided. They shook their heads, eager to get back to their cars, back to civilization. By mile 10, Derek hadn't seen another human for 90 minutes. The trail narrowed here, climbing gradually toward the interior wilderness. Moss covered everything, the ground, the nurse logs, the living trees themselves, creating a landscape of surreal uniformity. The Hoh River churned white and gray beside the trail, fed by glacial melt from Mount Olympus. The sound was constant, erasing all other noise. Derek stopped to check his GPS coordinates. 47.8534 degree N, a 123.8721 degree W, elevation 1,180 feet. He was approaching the area Connor had mentioned. He pulled out his compass. The GPS was useful, but Derek never fully trusted technology. The compass needle swung lazily, pointing north. Magnetic north, not true north. He made the mental adjustment automatically. That's when he saw the first marker. It wasn't official. No NPS insignia, no trail junction sign. Someone had tied strips of white cloth to branches leading off the main trail, heading southwest, deeper into the old growth. The fabric looked fresh, not weathered by rain and time. Derek approached the first marker, touched the cloth. Cotton, thin, almost translucent, like gauze, like a bandage, or a burial shroud. Derek pushed the thought away. Data, not speculation. He marked his position in his notebook, then keyed his radio. Static answered. The forest was playing hell with his signal. He'd have to investigate and return to report. The white markers led him 200 yards off the established trail. The understory grew thicker here, sword ferns reaching waist-high, devil's club with its vicious thorns creating natural barriers. Whoever had placed these markers had wanted to be followed. But by whom? The trees changed. Not species, still the towering Sitka spruce and western hemlock, but their arrangement. They formed a rough circle around a clearing that shouldn't exist. In the temperate rainforest, every inch of space was contested, filled. But here, maybe 30 feet across, nothing grew except moss. The ground was unnaturally level, and as Derek stepped into the clearing, his boots sank slightly. Soft earth, recently disturbed but not by natural processes. In the center of the clearing, someone had built a structure. Derek's analytical mind cataloged it automatically. 12 vertical posts, each roughly 8 feet tall, arranged in a circle. The posts looked old, weathered gray by decades of rain, but they stood straight and purposeful. Rope had been tied between them, creating a rough perimeter. The rope was newer, maybe months old, not years. And hanging from the rope at regular intervals were more strips of white cloth. Derek walked the perimeter slowly, photographing everything with his digital Canon. The camera's battery was at 47%. He'd charged it fully last night. He checked the LCD screen. The photos were overexposed, washed out with white light that hadn't been present when he'd taken them. Technical malfunction. He made a note to have the equipment checked. At the far side of the circle, he found Lauren's backpack. It sat upright against one of the posts, deliberately placed, not dropped. Derek knelt beside it, using his pen to open the main compartment without contaminating potential evidence. Inside, water bottles, granola bars, a first aid kit, a University of California Berkeley ID card in Lauren Hartley's name. Her iPhone, Flip phone, actually. The 4 hadn't come out yet. Was in the side pocket. Battery dead. But no Lauren. Derek stood, turned in a slow circle. The clearing felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the unusual absence of vegetation. The air was colder here, noticeably so, despite being surrounded by trees. His breath fogged. In October, in the Hoh rainforest, where the temperature rarely dropped below 50 degrees even at night. He checked his watch, 12:47 hours. Then he looked at the watch face again. The second hand wasn't moving. He tapped it. Nothing. The watch was digital, had never failed before. He pulled out his backup, an analog Timex. Its hands showed 1:13. Either watch could be wrong, or both. Derek marked the GPS coordinates, 47.8507 dig N, 123.8798 dig W. He photographed the backpack from multiple angles, then carefully secured it to his pack to bring back as evidence. He'd return with the SAR team, proper equipment, cadaver dogs if necessary. As he turned to leave, he noticed something he'd missed. A piece of paper tucked under one of the white cloths, protected from rain by a plastic bag. Derek pulled it free, opened the bag. The paper was aged, yellowed, but the ink was still legible. It was a photocopy of a newspaper article from the Port Angeles Evening News, dated November 3, 1974. The headline read, 12 dead in Olympic Forest logging accident. Derek read quickly, Yamato Timber Company. 12 workers, all Japanese nationals on temporary work visas. The article was sparse on details, catastrophic equipment failure and investigation ongoing. But a handwritten note in the margin, in what Derek assumed was Lauren's handwriting, said, not accident, sabotage, foreman's testimony sealed. Beneath the article was another document, a photocopy of what appeared to be a contract between Yamato Timber and Olympic National Forest, dated June 1974, authorizing selective harvest in designated areas prior to wilderness expansion. The coordinates listed matched almost exactly with Derek's current position, and there was a third page. This one wasn't a photocopy but a printed page from what looked like an academic journal. The title, Onryo and Industrial Tragedy, Vengeful Spirits in Japanese Labor History, by Dr. Kenji Tanaka, University of Washington, 2003. Derek's hands had gone numb. Not from cold, from something else. He forced himself to focus, to read. The article discussed Japanese folklore surrounding Onryo, vengeful spirits of those who died traumatically, especially through betrayal or injustice. Unlike peaceful spirits who moved on to the afterlife, Onryo remained bound to the location of their death, driven by rage to curse those responsible for their suffering. The article specifically mentioned Yurei, a subset of Onryo, recognizable by their white burial garments and long black hair. They were said to appear most frequently during the hour of the ox, Ushi no Koku, between 2 and 2:30 in the morning. Derek folded the papers, placed them in his jacket pocket. Folklore. Superstition. Lauren had been researching cultural beliefs around industrial accidents. It explained her interest in this location, but it didn't explain her disappearance. Except, Derek forced himself to think, 7 disappearances. Rachel's expression at the trailhead had been recognition. Derek pulled his radio, tried again. Rachel, this is Derek, do you copy? Static. Rachel, I'm at coordinates 47.8507 north, 123.8798 west. Found evidence of the missing hiker. I need you to pull all missing person reports for the Hoh River Trail area for the past... He paused. How long? For the past 20 years. Look for any patterns. The radio crackled. Rachel's voice came through broken. Ready did, found, files. Derek there, 7 since 1991. Same. The transmission cut out. 7 since 1991. 20 years. Derek did the math. Roughly 1 disappearance every 3 years. He pulled his notebook, began writing. Need pattern analysis. Ages, dates, specific locations, recovery status. A sound made him look up. Not from the trail behind him, but from deeper in the forest, past the clearing. A voice. Faint. Calling. Help me. Derek's training kicked in immediately. He moved toward the sound, calling out, "Lauren? Lauren Hartley? Please, help me." The voice was weak, directionless. Derek pulled his flashlight despite the afternoon light, swept it across the tree line. The beam seemed to dissipate in the moss, absorbed rather than reflected. "Keep calling so I can find you." Silence. Then, "I'm cold. So cold." The voice was to his left now. Derek moved that direction, his boots squelching in the soft ground. 30 feet past the clearing, the forest grew denser, more primeval. Trees here were enormous, 5-6 feet in diameter, rising like pillars into the canopy. Their bark was black with moisture and age. "Lauren?" Derek stopped. His flashlight had found something. 20 feet ahead, wrapped around a tree trunk, long black hair, masses of it trailing from somewhere above, hanging like Spanish moss, moving slightly in a breeze Derek couldn't feel. He approached slowly. The hair was real, human. He could see the individual strands, the slight wave to it. It continued up the trunk, disappearing into the branches 40 feet overhead. Derek tilted his head back, his flashlight following the hair upward. A face looked down at him. White. Impossibly white. A woman's face, too far away to see clearly, but the long black hair framed it, and she was too high, too still, positioned in a way that defied physics, because no one could climb that high and hang there without equipment, without support. Derek's flashlight fell from his hand. He didn't drop it. It simply left his grip, hit the ground, the lens shattering. The clearing went gray. When he looked up again, the tree was empty. Derek's heart hammered in his chest cavity, not racing but striking his ribs with deliberate force like something trying to get out. He retrieved his flashlight with shaking hands. The lens was shattered, but the bulb still worked, throwing fractured light. He moved backward, not turning his back on the tree until he reached the clearing again. His analytical mind was screaming at him. Optical illusion, shadow play, stress hallucination. Lauren was missing, and his subconscious had created a narrative from the folklore research she'd been doing. Except, the white cloths hanging from the rope around the clearing were moving now, despite the absence of wind. They moved with a rhythm, a purposefulness like breathing. Derek grabbed Lauren's backpack, turned, and headed back toward the main trail at a pace just short of running. He didn't run. Rational men didn't run from shadows, but he moved quickly, following the white cloth markers in reverse, counting them. 7, 6, 5, 4. At marker 3, he saw her. She stood between two trees, 30 feet off his path. A young woman in jeans and a green jacket. Brown hair. Lauren Hartley's driver's license photo matched. She wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at him. "Lauren." Derek changed direction, moving toward her. "Lauren, are you hurt?" She didn't respond, didn't blink, just stared. Derek closed the distance to 15 feet. "Lauren, I'm Ranger Derek Marsh. Your friend Connor reported you missing. Are you injured?" She opened her mouth. No words came out, but Derek could see inside her mouth, and there was white cloth in there, stuffed deep. A burial shroud crammed down her throat, and her eyes weren't right because they were looking at him, but through him, past him, at something behind him. Derek spun around. Nothing. Empty forest. When he turned back, Lauren was gone. He stood there breathing hard, his rational mind fracturing. He'd seen her. She'd been there. Real. Physical. But now there was no sign, no disturbed ferns, no footprints in the soft earth. Derek pulled his compass. The needle spun lazily in full circles, unable to find north. His GPS unit screen showed error. No signal. Impossible. GPS satellites didn't just disappear. He could see the main trail from here, could see the bright orange survey markers the NPS had installed. He moved toward them, no longer pretending this was anything but retreat. When he reached the trail, he allowed himself to breathe. Solid ground. Maintained path. Reality. He hiked back toward the ranger station at maximum sustainable pace. By his calculation, he'd reach it by 1600 hours, except when he checked his watch, both watches, They showed 2:47 p.m. He'd lost an hour somewhere, or gained one. Time was slipping. At mile 8, Derek passed a section of trail he was certain he'd already covered. The same fallen log, the same moss pattern. He checked his GPS, still showing error. He had his compass, but it remained useless, the needle dancing randomly. He had the sun, except the canopy was too thick and the fog had rolled in, turning the world into gradients of gray and green. Derek stopped, forced himself to think. He had trail skills. He didn't need technology. The river was constant. Follow the Ho River downstream and it would lead him out. He could hear the water to his north. North. He headed that direction. The forest had gone quiet. Derek realized he hadn't heard a bird in hours. No squirrels, no insects. The only sound was the river and his breathing and his boots on the trail. He rounded a bend and saw the clearing again. That was impossible. He'd been moving steadily away from it, following the river downstream, but there it was, the circle of posts, the white cloths, the disturbed earth. He checked his notebook. His handwriting said he'd found it at 47.8507 degree N, 123.8798 degree W. His GPS said error. Derek's hands started shaking. Not from fear. He refused to name it as fear, but from the dissolution of his understanding. He'd spent 15 years believing the wilderness was knowable, mappable, subject to human comprehension. This clearing shouldn't be here. He shouldn't be here. He turned around, headed back the direction he'd come. He walked for what felt like 30 minutes. When he checked his watch, it showed 2:47 p.m. Still, the second hand on his analog watch was moving, but when he timed it against his heartbeat, it was moving slowly. Too slowly. A laugh escaped his throat, high and tight. Derek Marsh didn't laugh like that. Derek Marsh was rational, controlled, methodical. But Derek Marsh's methodology was failing because the forest was breaking the rules. He reached the clearing a third time. Or maybe he'd never left. He couldn't tell anymore. This time Lauren was standing in the center by the posts. She looked solid, real, except for her skin, which was too pale, and her clothes, which hung wrong, like they were wet even though it wasn't raining. Lauren, Derek's voice came out hoarse. What happened to you? She opened her mouth. That white cloth again, stuffed inside, but now Derek could see it wasn't cloth. It was something else, something that looked like silk, and it was moving, undulating like it was alive or like something was pulling it from inside her. They pulled us down, Lauren said, except her mouth didn't move. The words came from somewhere else, from the trees, from the earth. 12 of them, holding us, won't let go. Derek took a step back. Who pulled you down? The angry ones, the betrayed ones. They died wrong, died knowing they were murdered. I don't understand, Derek's voice cracked. Foreman cut the cables, maintenance manager paid him, wanted to shut down the operation, collect insurance. 12 men died when the trees fell wrong, crushed, drowned in sap and soil, buried in a mass grave where the clearing is now. Derek's mind caught on the word. Is. You said is. Their bodies are here. Never found, never returned to families, never received Buddhist rites. They're still here, Ranger. Still dying. Over and over. And they're so hungry. Lauren smiled. It wasn't her smile. Her teeth were too white, her mouth too wide. Every few years someone comes, someone looking for them, someone curious about the tragedy. The Onryo pull them down, try to trade places, try to escape the cycle, but it never works. The betrayal is too great, the anger too deep. You're not Lauren, Derek said. Not anymore. She took a step forward. Her movement was wrong, not walking, but gliding, her feet not quite touching the ground. Derek noticed her shadow now. It was facing the wrong direction, cast by a light source that didn't exist. They want you to know, not Lauren said. They want you to tell the families, 12 families who never learned the truth. Fumio Nakamura, Akira Yamamoto, Kenji Sato. She listed the names, all 12. Derek's hands moved automatically, writing them in his notebook, and he realized this was insane, taking dictation from an apparition, but the names felt important, felt real. When she finished, Not Lauren tilted her head. But you won't tell them, because you don't believe, because you think you're hallucinating, because rational men don't believe in ghosts. I don't know what I believe anymore, Derek whispered. Then let me show you. The forest inverted. Derek's vision swam, and suddenly he wasn't standing in the clearing but lying on his back, staring up through the canopy. Weight pressed on his chest. Immense weight, crushing weight. He couldn't breathe. Tree trunks lay across his body, their bark rough against his face. He could smell sap and blood and betrayal, could feel the knowledge that he'd been murdered, that his death had been planned, that he would never go home, never receive proper burial rites, never find peace. And beneath him, through him, around him, were 11 others, all feeling the same thing, all trapped in the moment of their death, replaying it endlessly, their rage feeding on itself, growing stronger with each cycle until they weren't human anymore, weren't anything but hunger and anger and the desperate need to make someone, anyone, understand what had been done to them. Derek snapped back to standing. He was gasping, his chest heaving, his clothes soaked with sweat despite the cold. Not Lauren stood watching him. Now you understand, she said. Now you believe. What do you want? Derek forced the words out. We want to stop being hungry. We want to stop dying. We want justice. The people who did this are probably dead themselves by now. It's been almost 40 years. Then we want to be remembered. We want our families to know. We want proper burial. We want the cycle to end. Derek's mind, even shattered as it was, latched onto the practical. How? How do I end this? Not Lauren pointed at the posts. Buddhist sutras, salt circles, Ofuda talismans blessed by a priest, cremation of the remains, traditional rites performed at dawn. These things we know from memory, from culture, but no one has done them. No one knows we're here. I know you're here now. Knowing isn't enough. Believing isn't enough. You have to act. Derek looked at his notebook, at the 12 names written in his handwriting. If I do this, if I try to do this, will you release the others? Lauren and the 6 before her? We're trying, Not Lauren said. And for a moment, Derek heard the real Lauren underneath, desperate and terrified. But it's been so long. We're so hungry. And the anger it's like gravity. It pulls everything down. Even when we want to let go, we can't remember how. The forest shifted again. Derek felt it like a change in air pressure. The light was dimming, turning gray-blue. He checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Still. The hour of the ox is coming, Not Lauren said. Between 2 and 2:30 a.m., that's when we're strongest, when the boundary is thinnest, when the Onryo can cross over fully. It's the middle of the afternoon. Time moves differently here. For us, it's always almost 2 a.m., always almost time, always hungry. Derek heard movement in the forest around the clearing, many bodies moving through undergrowth. He turned in a circle, saw figures between the trees, 12 of them. They wore work clothes, flannel shirts, canvas pants, leather boots. Their skin was wrong, mottled gray and black like bark. Their eyes were white, no pupils, no irises, and they were all staring at him. I'll do it, Derek said quickly. I'll bring a priest. I'll perform the rites, just let me leave. Leave? The word came from all 12 figures simultaneously. There is no leave. There is only here, only now. Only the moment of death replaying forever. They moved forward as one. Derek ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, no longer caring about the trail, just trying to put distance between himself and the clearing. Ferns slapped his face. Devil's club thorns tore his jacket. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs cramped, until he tripped over a root and went sprawling. When he looked up, he was at the edge of the clearing again. No. No, no, no. He got to his feet, chose a different direction, ran again. 10 minutes of pure flight. When he stopped, chest heaving, he could see the circle of posts through the trees ahead. Derek tried a third time. Same result. Fourth time. Fifth. The clearing was everywhere. Or he was trapped in it. Or there was no difference anymore. Derek collapsed against a tree trunk, sliding down until he sat in the moss. His notebook had fallen from his pocket. He picked it up, looked at the names. 12 men. 12 families who never got closure. 12 spirits trapped in the moment of their death. And 7 people who'd come looking for them over the years, who'd gotten pulled into the cycle. Lauren was just the latest. Derek was going to be next. He should fight it. Should keep trying to escape. But he was so tired. And the rational part of his mind, the analytical core that had defined him for 32 years, was examining the situation with cold clarity. He was trapped in a supernatural phenomenon beyond his understanding or ability to control. The normal rules didn't apply. Logic had failed. For the first time in his adult life, Derek Marsh didn't know what to do. A sound made him look up. Not. Lauren stood nearby, but her form was flickering now, shifting between the young woman and something else. Something with 2 long limbs and a face that was all angles and hunger. "You can join us," she said. "Or you can help us. I can't help if I'm trapped here too. Then you have to believe harder. Have to want escape more than you want rationality. The cycle feeds on certainty, on the belief that the world follows rules. You have to break your rules, Ranger. You have to accept what you can't explain." Derek closed his eyes. He thought about his career, his reputation, his self-image as the machine. He thought about how he'd always dismissed rangers who talked about strange experiences in the woods, who claimed to see things that couldn't exist. He'd been so certain, so sure that everything could be explained. That certainty was a cage. Derek opened his eyes. "I believe," he said. "I believe you're here. I believe you died wrong. I believe you deserve justice. And I believe I'm the only one who can help." The forest held its breath. "But I can't help if I'm dead or trapped. So you have to let me go. Not because the rules say you should. Not because it's logical. But because I'm asking. Because I'm the first person in 40 years to acknowledge what happened to you, to write down your names, to promise I'll try to make it right." Not Lauren's form solidified. Just for a moment, she looked like herself again, frightened, young, lost. "I don't know if they'll listen," she whispered. "The Onryo. They're so angry. Ask them." Derek stood. The 12 figures were still there, surrounding the clearing. But they'd stopped moving. They stood like trees, waiting. Derek pulled his notebook, read the names aloud. Fumio Nakamura, Akira Yamamoto, Kenji Sato, Hiroshi Tanaka, Masaru Watanabe, Toshiro Suzuki, Daiichi Ito, Ryo Kobayashi, Haruto Kimura, Yuki Matsumoto, Kaito Hayashi, Takeshi Yamada. As he spoke each name, one of the figures twitched, a ripple of recognition passing through it. "You were murdered," Derek continued. "Your families never knew what really happened. Your bodies were hidden. You never received proper burial. That was wrong. That was evil. And I can't undo it. But I can tell the truth. I can find your families. I can bring a priest. I can try to give you what you should have had 40 years ago." The figures didn't move. Derek couldn't tell if they'd heard, if they understood, if they cared. Then one of them, Fumio Nakamura, Derek's mind supplied, stepped forward. It opened its mouth. No sound came out, but Derek felt the word press against his thoughts. "Go." The others echoed it. "Go. Go. Go." Derek found himself on the main Ho River Trail. No transition, no sense of movement. One moment in the clearing, the next on solid marked path. His GPS flickered to life. 47.86.12 Ding 123.8445 Dig W. Mile 9. His watch showed 4:23 p.m. Time had resumed. He walked downstream. His legs moved automatically, his mind still fragmented. 20 minutes later, he saw Rachel hiking toward him. accompanied by 2 other rangers from the SAR team. "Derek!" Rachel's face flooded with relief. "We lost radio contact 4 hours ago. We've been looking." She stopped, really seeing him. What happened? Derek looked down at himself. His jacket was torn. His hands were covered in dirt and what might have been blood but wasn't his blood. He was shaking. "I found evidence," he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "Found Lauren Hartley's backpack. Found documentation about the 1974 logging accident. Found..." He paused. What had he found? "I need to file a comprehensive report, and I need contact information for any families of Japanese workers employed by Yamato Timber Company in 1974. Rachel and the other rangers exchanged glances. "Derek, are you injured? You're not making sense." "I'm making perfect sense," Derek said, and realized it was true. For the first time in his adult life, he was seeing clearly. There are 12 bodies that were never recovered. There are families that never got closure, and there are 7 people who've disappeared on this trail over the past 20 years, all connected to the same site. We need cadaver dogs. We need ground-penetrating radar. We need excavation permits. And we need a Buddhist priest. A priest? Rachel's concern was morphing into alarm. Derek pulled his notebook, showed them the names. These men deserve proper burial rites. The victims deserve justice. And if we don't do this right, there will be more disappearances. Every few years, forever. The senior ranger, Tom Callahan, stepped forward. He was 50, weathered, had been with the NPS since 1987. He looked at Derek's notebook, then at Derek's face, then out at the forest. "I've worked this area for 24 years, Tom said slowly. "And I've always known there was something wrong about Mile 11. Rangers won't patrol it alone. SAR teams report equipment failures. And yeah, people disappear. One every few years, like clockwork. But every time I've tried to investigate properly, my superiors shut it down. Say there's no pattern. Say it's coincidence." "It's not coincidence," Derek said. "It's Onryo, vengeful spirits, Yurei. Call it whatever you want, but it's real, and it's killing people, and it won't stop until we make it right." Tom studied him for a long moment. Then, "Okay, let's say I believe you. What do we do?" "We do our jobs," Derek said. "We find the bodies. We contact the families. We document the crime scene, because it was a crime. Deliberate sabotage resulting in 12 deaths. We get justice. And then we bring in people who know how to handle the spiritual component." Rachel was looking at Derek like she'd never seen him before. "You're serious, Derek? The machine Marsh is standing here telling us he believes in ghosts." "I don't believe in ghosts," Derek said. "I know they exist. There's a difference. Belief is faith. Knowledge is evidence. I have evidence." He didn't tell them about not Lauren, about time stopping, about being trapped in the clearing. He didn't tell them about seeing the 12 Onryo, about experiencing their death from the inside. Some things couldn't be explained, even with evidence. But he showed them the clearing. He showed them Lauren's backpack. He showed them the white cloths, the circle of posts. And when the cadaver dogs arrived the next day, they went insane at the center of the clearing, barking and whining and refusing to enter. The ground-penetrating radar showed 12 anomalies consistent with human remains at a depth of 4 feet, arranged in a rough circle. The excavation took 3 days. They found bones, fragmentary remains, evidence of trauma consistent with being crushed by multiple falling trees. They found rotted work clothes, personal effects. They found evidence of deliberate cable sabotage, cut marks on metal that shouldn't be cut. And they found Lauren Hartley, alive but catatonic, curled in a hollow beneath one of the posts. She'd been missing for 4 days, but showed signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration consistent with weeks. Her hair had gone partially white. She wouldn't, or couldn't, speak. Over the next 2 weeks, Derek worked obsessively. He tracked down 5 surviving family members of the Yamato timber workers, now elderly, scattered across California and Washington. He helped arrange for the remains to be properly identified through DNA when possible. anthropological analysis when not. He contacted the Japanese consulate. He found a Buddhist priest in Seattle willing to perform traditional funerary rites. The ceremony took place at dawn on November 2, 2011 at the clearing. 12 sets of remains in proper crematory urns, salt circles drawn around the site, Ofuda talismans blessed and placed at each cardinal direction. The priest chanted sutras Derek didn't understand, but felt in his chest, in his bones, in the place where rational thought gave way to something older. Derek stood beside 5 elderly Japanese Americans who'd traveled to witness their grandfathers and uncles finally receive proper burial. Some wept. Some stood stone-faced. All bowed deeply when the priest finished. And Derek felt it. The release, like a pressure valve opening. The clearing sighed. That night, Derek returned to his cabin at the ranger station. He hadn't slept properly in 2 weeks. His supervisor had ordered him to take administrative leave to see the department psychologist, to get his head straight before returning to duty. Derek didn't plan to return to duty. Not here. Not in wilderness law enforcement. Something fundamental had broken in him. Or maybe it had been broken all along and he'd just now noticed. He sat at his desk reviewing his final report. The official version documented the discovery of human remains, the evidence of industrial sabotage in 1974, the tragic concealment of the crime. It made no mention of Onryo or Yurei or vengeful spirits. It didn't need to. But Derek kept a personal notebook, separate from official records. In it, he'd written everything he'd experienced, everything he'd seen. He wrote it clinically, analytically, but he wrote it truthfully. If someone found it after he was gone, they'd think he was insane. But he knew better now. There were things in the wilderness that couldn't be mapped, couldn't be explained, couldn't be controlled through methodology and protocol. And the world was far stranger, far more dangerous and far more beautiful than he'd ever allowed himself to believe. At 2:14 a.m., Derek heard a sound outside his cabin. He went to the window, looked out at the Hoh rainforest. Fog drifted between the trees, as it always did. But standing at the edge of the clearing, just visible in the moonlight, were 13 figures. 12 men in work clothes, and 1 young woman in jeans and a green jacket. Lauren Hartley, the real Lauren, not the possessed version, was standing on her own now. She looked at Derek's cabin, raised one hand in a gesture that might have been goodbye, or thanks, or just acknowledgement. Then the 13 figures turned and walked into the forest. They didn't disappear, didn't fade. They just walked. And Derek understood. They were finally moving on, finally released from the cycle, finally free. He watched until they vanished into the trees. Then he closed the curtains, returned to his desk, and finished his report. 3 weeks later, Derek Marsh resigned from the National Park Service. He moved to Seattle, enrolled in a graduate program in cultural anthropology. His thesis topic, Spiritual Traditions in Immigrant Communities and the Psychological Impact of Unresolved Tragedy. He never returned to Olympic National Park, but he monitored the missing persons reports religiously, and over the next decade, there wasn't a single disappearance on the Hoh River Trail. The clearing remained, though. Derek arranged for it to be marked with a proper memorial, a wooden marker bearing 12 names and the dates of their deaths. The NPS agreed after some persuasion. The families contributed stones from their ancestral homes in Japan, which were placed around the memorial. And every year on November 2nd, Derek drove to Olympic National Park and hiked to Mile 11. He left offerings, rice, sake, incense. He read the names aloud. He acknowledged what had happened, and the forest remained quiet. But Derek never stopped checking over his shoulder, never stopped flinching at unexpected sounds, never fully recovered the certainty he'd once had about the nature of reality. Because once you've felt the weight of a vengeful spirit's rage, once you've experienced death from the inside, once you've seen the boundary between worlds dissolve, you never forget. And you never stop wondering what else is out there, hiding in the places where the rational mind refuses to look. Derek Marsh had spent 15 years believing the wilderness could be understood through data, Now he knew better. The wilderness kept its secrets, and some secrets were hungry enough to keep you too. On cold nights when sleep wouldn't come, Derek would pull out his personal notebook and read the names one more time. Fumio Nakamura, Akira Yamamoto, Kenji Sato, Hiroshi Tanaka, Masaru Watanabe, Toshiro Suzuki, Daiichi Ito, Ryo Kobayashi, Haruto Kimura, Yuki Matsumoto, Kaido Hayashi, Takeshi Yamada. 12 men who deserved better than they got. 7 people who'd paid the price for that injustice. And 1 forest ranger who'd learned that the most terrifying thing about the wilderness wasn't what you could see, but what you couldn't explain. The Hoh rainforest continued growing as it always had. Moss covered the memorial stones. Rain fed the river. Trees fell and new trees grew from their decay. The cycle continued, but in the clearing where the Yamato timber workers had died, where Lauren Hartley had nearly joined them, where Derek Marsh had lost his certainty, there the wind moved differently, softer, less angry. And if you visited at dawn, when the light turned the fog golden, you might see white cloth hanging from branches, or you might not. Reality, Derek had learned, was negotiable in places where grief and rage had soaked into the soil. He'd promised to tell their story. He'd kept that promise. And in return, they'd let him go. But some part of Derek Marsh never left that clearing. Some part remained trapped at 2:47 p.m. on October 14, 2011, when time stopped and the impossible became inevitable. And on dark nights, when the fog rolled in thick enough to taste, Derek would wake from dreams of drowning in sap and soil, of being crushed beneath fallen trees, of dying with the knowledge of betrayal sharp in his throat. The Onryo had released him, but they'd left their mark. Forever. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Carter hadn't slept properly in 3 years, not since the Adirondacks. The nightmares had dulled to a manageable static background noise he'd learned to function through like tinnitus, but they never truly left. Some nights he'd wake with his hands clenched so tight his fingernails drew blood from his palms. Other nights he wouldn't wake at all, just stare at his ceiling until dawn leaked through the curtains of his cabin at the edge of the Boundary Waters. The transfer to Superior National Forest had been his therapist's idea. New environment, new purpose, fresh start. Dr. Reimer hadn't understood that geography couldn't outrun what lived in Carter's head. But the posting was remote, the winters brutal, and most importantly, it kept him away from other rangers for weeks at a time. That suited him fine. The call came through on his Motorola radio at 6:47 a.m. on February 3, 2009. Static crackled, then dispatch, Linda Kowalski, bored and efficient. Carter, we've got a missing person report. 23-year-old female Sophia Chen failed to return from a solo winter camping trip. Last known location, Magnetic Lake Trail. Family filed the report 8 hours ago. Carter pressed the transmit button, his breath forming clouds in the unheated cabin. Outside, the thermometer read -18 Fahrenheit. Solo winter camping? In this? Apparently, she's experienced. Had a spot GPS beacon, but it went dark 2 days ago. Last ping was near the portage between Magnetic and Disappointment Lakes. Disappointment Lake. The name felt prophetic. Carter copied down the coordinates, already pulling on his thermal layers. His hands trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the familiar pre-mission anxiety that had plagued him since Marcus died. Since he'd found what was left of Marcus scattered across that clearing in the Adirondacks, arranged in a pattern that still made no sense, that the official reports had blamed on a black bear despite the wrongness of everything about that scene. He forced the memory down. I'll head out within the hour. Weather window? You've got maybe 30 hours before the next system moves in. After that, nobody's going anywhere for a week. Carter signed off and finished gearing up. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness was over 1 million acres of lakes, forests, and stone ridges that formed the spine of the border between Minnesota and Ontario. In summer, it was a paddler's paradise. In February, It was a white hell where exposed skin could freeze in minutes and disorientation killed as efficiently as hypothermia. He loaded his pack with methodical precision: emergency bivouac, chemical heat packs, rope, first aid kit, 2 days of food, water filtration tablets, his Garmin E-Trex GPS unit, extra batteries, headlamp, and the satellite phone that barely worked under the forest canopy. He checked his compass 3 times, an old superstition, then locked the cabin and headed for his truck. The drive to the Magnetic Lake trailhead took 90 minutes on roads that were more suggestion than certainty. His pickup's chains bit into the ice-packed highway as he passed through the skeleton town of Ely, Minnesota. Population 3,460 and dropping, the iron mines long depleted, tourism its only remaining pulse. A few ice fishermen's trucks sat in parking lots. Smoke rose from chimneys into a sky the color of old bone. He stopped at the ranger station to file his route plan with Tom Redsky, the Ojibwe guide who'd worked these forests for 40 years. Tom looked up from his coffee when Carter entered, his weathered face unreadable. "Heard about the missing girl? Sophia Chen, you know her? Checked in here 4 days ago. Seemed capable. Good gear, knew the routes." Tom paused, his dark eyes studying Carter with uncomfortable intensity. "That's the third one." Carter's stomach clenched. "Third what?" "Third person to go missing in that area since November. First was a trapper named Victor Holmgren, 71 years old, knew these woods better than anyone. Found his cabin abandoned, food still on the stove, rifle still on the wall. Second was a couple from Chicago, newlyweds on a winter expedition. They had all the right gear, filed proper plans, and vanished somewhere between Magnetic and Disappointment." Tom tapped his pen against the logbook. "Search and rescue went out for weeks. Found nothing. Not their tent, not their gear, not a single track. Like they evaporated." "Why wasn't I briefed on this pattern?" "Because officially there is no pattern. Victor probably got disoriented despite his experience, fell through thin ice. The couple made a navigation error and froze somewhere off trail. That's what the reports say." Tom's voice held no conviction. "But my grandfather used to tell stories about that stretch of forest. Old stories. Ojibwe don't go there in winter if we can help it." Carter felt something cold settle in his gut that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What kind of stories?" Tom stood and walked to the window, looking out at the endless white forest. The kind that get written off as superstition. The kind where people come back wrong if they come back at all. "The Wittikow walks in winter, Carter. That's what the elders say. The starving spirit. It hunts when the snow is deep and the sun is weak." He turned back. "You ever hear something in the woods that made you question what's possible?" "Yes. In the Adirondacks." Marcus's screams cutting off mid-sound. The silence that followed, so absolute it felt deliberate. The thing he'd glimpsed at the tree line, too tall and too thin and moving wrong. "I don't believe in folklore," Carter lied. "Belief's irrelevant. Some things exist whether you accept them or not." Tom returned to his desk and pulled out a small leather pouch. "My grandmother made this. Asima, tobacco and other things. Traditional protection. I know how this sounds, but humor an old man and keep it in your pocket." Carter took the pouch. It was surprisingly heavy. "Tom, I appreciate. The Ojibwe word is Wendigo. Different bands say it different ways. But it's all the same thing. A person who commits the worst taboo, eating human flesh, becomes something else. Something that's always hungry, always hunting, can never be satisfied. The transformation hollows them out, makes them taller, stronger, makes their hearts turn to ice. They look human from a distance but up close." Tom shook his head. "My grandfather saw one when he was young. Said its eyes were just holes full of winter." Carter pocketed the pouch to be polite, though his rational mind rejected everything Tom was saying. Yet underneath that rationalism, something primitive understood. Something that had been whispering to him since Marcus died. "I'll be careful." Careful's not enough. If you see tracks that start human and become something else, don't follow them. If you hear someone calling your name but can't see them, don't answer. And if you smell rotten air this cold, run. Just run, and don't look back. The magnetic lake trailhead was deserted. Carter shouldered his pack and checked his GPS. Sophia's last known coordinates were 4.7 miles northeast, assuming the terrain allowed a straight shot, which in the boundary waters it never did. He'd have to follow the frozen shorelines, portage between lakes, and hope the spot beacon ping was accurate within its reported 50-foot margin. The temperature had dropped to -23. His breath felt sharp in his lungs. The trail began in dense pine forest, the snow nearly waist-deep in places where the wind couldn't reach. Carter moved carefully, testing each step with his trekking poles before committing his weight. The silence was oppressive. No birds, no wind, no sounds of life. Just the crunch of his snowshoes and his own labored breathing. The pines pressed close, their branches heavy with snow that occasionally released in soft impacts that made him flinch. He was already seeing Marcus in his peripheral vision, a hazard of exhaustion and trauma, nothing supernatural. Just his mind playing tricks, just PTSD, just the 3 years of accumulated guilt manifesting as shadows between trees. But these shadows seemed to move with purpose. He reached Magnetic Lake after an hour of brutal hiking. The lake stretched out, a white plain nearly half a mile across, the ice thick enough to hold a truck, but still Carter approached it with trepidation. Ice this cold could be paradoxically weak, thermal shock creating fractures invisible beneath the snow. He stayed near the shore where it was safest and made his way toward the northern portage. His GPS showed Sophia's last ping was another 2 miles ahead, just past Disappointment Lake. That's when he found the first campsite. It was too neat. That was his initial impression, standing at the edge of the clearing where someone had pitched a tent recently enough that the snow around it was only ankle deep rather than waist deep. But everything was arranged with unnatural precision. The tent, a quality North Face four-season model, sat perfectly centered in the clearing. The food hang rope was tied exactly between 2 trees like someone had measured the distance. The fire ring had been cleared and the stones placed in a perfect circle. No char marks, no ash. The tent's entrance faced exactly east. Carter approached slowly. Sophia? Sophia Chen? Nothing. His voice died in the air like it had weight. He unzipped the tent's fly with his gloved hand. Inside was a sleeping bag, inflatable pad, a small LED lantern, and a journal. Everything neat. Everything arranged. He grabbed the journal and backed out of the tent, some instinct refusing to let him linger inside that space. The journal's last entry was dated 2 days ago. Day 3. Made it to Magnetic Lake. Weather holding. Strange dreams last night. Dreamed I was following footprints through the snow, but when I looked down they were my own footprints coming back toward me. Woke up exhausted, like I'd actually been walking all night. Found myself outside the tent. Don't remember leaving. Maybe altitude? No, wait, wrong. No altitude here. Stupid. Maybe just cold affecting my sleep. Something watching from the tree line this morning. Probably deer. Kept glimpsing movement, but when I looked directly, nothing there. Tomorrow, pushing north to Disappointment Lake. Signal's been wonky on the spot. Should have brought a sat phone like Dad suggested. Getting dark early. Temperature dropping fast. Carter flipped back through earlier entries. Sophia was methodical, noting distances, weather conditions, wildlife sightings. A competent outdoors woman. The entries grew increasingly anxious as they progressed, though she seemed unaware of the shift in her own tone. References to poor sleep became constant, mentions of being watched. On day 2, she'd written, "So hungry today. Ate all my lunch by 10 a.m. and wanted more. Made myself wait until dinner but couldn't focus on anything except eating. This isn't normal for me. Maybe burning more calories than expected in this cold?" The word hungry was underlined 3 times. Carter photographed the pages with his digital camera, then searched the rest of the campsite. Sophia's pack was in the tent, food still sealed in a bear canister. Her boots were missing, so was her parka. The rational explanation, she'd gotten disoriented, maybe hypothermic, and wandered off in confusion. But that didn't explain the unnatural neatness of everything. the geometric precision that felt more like a display than a campsite. He found the tracks 30 yards north of the tent, footprints in the snow, boot treads clear in the LED beam of his headlamp as afternoon faded to dusk. They headed northeast toward Disappointment Lake. He followed them for 10 yards, 20, 50. The tracks maintained an unnaturally straight line, like Sophia had walked without deviation through dense forest. Then at 60 yards, the tracks changed. The stride lengthened, the depth increased as if the person had become heavier, and the boot prints began to blur, the tread pattern becoming indistinct, as if the feet making them were changing shape as they walked. Carter knelt and examined one print carefully. It was definitely a boot impression at the heel, but the toe area had stretched, elongated, the tread marks giving way to something that looked almost like claw marks in the snow. His heart hammered. Tom's words echoed, "If you see tracks that start human and become something else, don't follow them." But Sophia was out here, somewhere. Maybe still alive, maybe injured and disoriented. He had a responsibility. He'd failed Marcus by being too slow, too cautious. He wouldn't fail again. The tracks led him through darkening forest as his headlamp became his only source of light. The temperature continued to drop. His face felt brittle, his fingers growing numb despite his gloves. The forest around him seemed to lean inward, the shadows between trees taking on suggestion and form. Once he heard what sounded like footsteps matching his pace 50 yards to his right. But when he stopped, the sound stopped too. When he moved, they resumed. He tried to convince himself it was an echo, some acoustic trick of the frozen air, but echoes didn't work that way in dense forest. He reached Disappointment Lake as full darkness settled. His GPS showed he was near Sophia's last ping coordinates, but the lake stretched out vast and featureless in his headlamp beam. The wind had picked up, driving snow crystals across the ice with a sound like whispered conversation. The tracks led onto the lake, still impossibly straight, and Carter followed because he had no other choice. Halfway across, he found the blood, a dark stain in the snow, frozen solid spreading from a central point about 3 feet in diameter. But there was too much of it, far too much to have come from any injury a person could survive. And mixed with the blood were pieces of a parka, North Face, the same brand as Sophia's tent, torn into strips, the fabric shredded as if by teeth or claws. He photographed everything with numb fingers, his breath coming faster, the sound of his own pulse roaring in his ears. That's when his headlamp caught something at the far edge of the bloodstain. A trail of drag marks heading north, accompanied by tracks that were no longer even remotely human. These prints were enormous, easily 2 feet long, with what looked like 3 or 4 elongated toes ending in deep puncture marks. The stride between prints was 8 feet, 9 feet, impossible for anything walking on 2 legs unless it was impossibly tall, unless it had changed. Carter's radio crackled. Static, then distorted voice. "Carter, can you at position?" He fumbled for the radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Carter. I found evidence of an attack at Disappointment Lake. Lots of blood, torn clothing, tracks heading north. I need immediate backup and..." The radio shrieked, a sound like feedback but organic, almost like a scream. Then silence. He tried again. Dead. Completely dead, even though he'd checked the batteries before leaving. His satellite phone was in his pack. He reached for it with hands that trembled now, not from cold but from the growing certainty that something was deeply wrong. The sat phone's screen was cracked. He didn't remember dropping it. When he tried to power it on, nothing happened. Alone. Miles from help. Temperature dropping toward -30. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, those tracks continued. He should turn back. Radio for help at the ranger station. Let search and rescue handle this. But the drag marks suggested something alive, something being pulled. The rational part of his mind said it was impossible, that Sophia had lost too much blood to survive. But he'd learned in the Adirondacks that impossible was negotiable. Tom's pouch felt heavy in his pocket. He could smell the tobacco through the leather and underneath something else. Cedar, sage, something sharp and protective. He pulled it out and held it. And maybe it was just the cold numbing his brain, but he felt steadier. Focused. The tracks led off the lake and into a dense stand of spruce trees that grew so close together Carter had to turn sideways to follow. The drag marks stopped at the tree line. The enormous footprints continued, but now they were accompanied by a second trail of prints, human-sized boots. Sophia's boots. As if she was walking again. No. As if something wearing her boots was walking. The smell hit him then. Tom had warned him, rot in cold air. It shouldn't be possible. Decay slowed to nothing in these temperatures, but the stench was undeniable. Sweet and putrid, meat gone to corruption, but underneath that a smell like freezer burn and metal, like blood frozen and thawed too many times. His stomach lurched, but he forced himself forward, following both sets of tracks into the spruce forest. The trees opened into a small clearing. In the center stood what had once been a man. Carter's mind tried to reject what his eyes reported. The figure was impossibly tall, maybe 8 feet, maybe 9, hard to judge in the shadows beyond his headlamp beam. Its skin was gray-white, pulled taut over bones that seemed too long, joints bending at wrong angles. Its torso was emaciated, ribs pressing against skin that looked like frozen leather. But its stomach was distended, swollen, like something had been crammed inside too forcefully. The face was worst. Elongated like the body, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, eyes sunken so deep they were just black pits, and the mouth, stretched wide in a permanent grimace, showing teeth too numerous and too sharp, lips pulled back in a frozen snarl of perpetual hunger. The Wendigo turned its head toward Carter, not quickly but with the deliberate movement of something that knew it had already won. When it opened its mouth, the sound that emerged was like wind through bones, ice cracking on a frozen lake, and underneath barely audible. Carter. So hungry, Carter. It was Marcus's voice. Marcus's voice coming from that thing's throat. Carter's legs wouldn't move. His mind couldn't process. 3 years collapsed into this moment. The clearing in the Adirondacks, Marcus screaming, the shape at the tree line. This shape, this thing that had killed his partner and taken his voice and was now using it to pin Carter in place with terror so profound his body had stopped accepting signals from his brain. The Wendigo took a step forward. Behind it, half hidden by the spruce branches, Carter saw Sophia, or what was left of her. She hung in the branches like a marionette, her face blue-white with cold, her eyes still open and aware and filled with such horror that Carter's mind wanted to shut down rather than process that she was still conscious, still alive inside a body that was being transformed inch by inch into something monstrous. Her jaw was distended, dislocated, hanging open at an angle no human jaw should achieve. Her fingers had elongated, the skin splitting to reveal bone that continued growing, changing. And her expression, no longer human, no longer capable of human expression, but something frozen between agony and hunger that had transcended one and not yet fully reached the other. "The first taste is hardest," the Wendigo said in Marcus's voice. "After that, everything becomes food. Everything becomes the hunger." Carter's hand found Tom's pouch. He didn't remember reaching for it. The leather was warm despite the cold, warm enough to burn through his glove. He pulled it out and the Wendigo recoiled, taking one step back, its entire body stiffening. "Tobacco," it hissed. "Old medicine. But old medicine fades. Hunger never does." Sophia's body twitched. Her hand reached toward Carter, fingers clicking together with sounds like breaking icicles. Her mouth moved, the dislocated jaw working, trying to form words or maybe just reflexively preparing to bite. Carter could see down her throat, could see something moving in there, something dark and writhing that lived in the space where her humanity used to be. He ran. The forest erupted behind him with sounds of pursuit, branches snapping, snow exploding, and underneath it all that voice, Marcus's voice, calling his name with increasing anger. "Carter, Carter, so hungry, Carter. You left me hungry, Carter. You let me starve, and now I'm so hungry all the time, forever." The words stabbed into his guilt like hooks. He had left Marcus. He'd heard his partner screaming, and instead of running toward the sound, he'd frozen, paralyzed, and by the time he'd forced himself to move, it was too late. Marcus had been gone. Marcus had been taken, and Carter had lived with that knowledge every day for 3 years. He burst out of the spruce forest and onto Disappointment Lake. The ice stretched out before him, a killing field of open space with nowhere to hide. His headlamp beam showed the vastness of it, maybe a mile to the far shore. Behind him, the crashes were getting closer. The Wendigo wasn't just pursuing him, it was hurting him, driving him toward exhaustion. That's what it did, Tom had said. The old stories were clear. The Wendigo chased its prey until they collapsed from exhaustion, then fed. Sometimes it transformed them, sometimes it just consumed them. It depended on how hungry it was, and this thing was always hungry. Carter's lungs burned. The cold air felt like knives with every breath. His legs were lead weights. He was going to die out here like Marcus died, like Victor Holmgren died, like the couple from Chicago died. The pattern was clear now. The Wendigo hunted this area every winter, taking the isolated, the unprepared, the unlucky. And somehow Marcus's death in the Adirondacks 3 years ago, was connected. The thing pursuing him knew details it shouldn't know, spoke with a voice from a different forest hundreds of miles away. Unless there was more than one. Unless the Wendigo wasn't a single creature, but a transformation, a curse that spread. Anyone who consumed human flesh in desperate circumstances, anyone who crossed that taboo became this. Became endless hunger wrapped in a parody of human form. Halfway across the lake, he fell. His snowshoe caught on something and he went down hard, the ice bruising his ribs through his layers. He rolled onto his back, gasping, and saw it emerge from the tree line. It moved with the liquid grace of something that had once been human, but remembered none of the limitations. Each stride covered 20 feet. Its arms were too long, reaching almost to the ice as it ran. The distended stomach bounced with each step, making wet sounds. And the worst part, its face wore Marcus's expression. The exact look Marcus had given him the last time they'd spoken, that mixture of concern and camaraderie and trust. "You failed me," it said, and Marcus's voice came out perfectly, achingly familiar. "You let me suffer. Now you'll understand. The hunger, Carter. The hunger is everything. It erases thought, erases memory, erases self. There's only need, only consumption, only the endless hollow that nothing can fill." Carter clutched the pouch and felt words come to his lips. Words he didn't know he remembered. Words Tom's grandmother had somehow embedded in that simple leather bag. Ojibwe words, protection words, though his pronunciation was surely butchered. Ga win oma, nanandawiwe. The Wendigo stopped. Its entire body went rigid. For a moment it looked almost human again, almost like Marcus before the bones started stretching, before the hunger took over. Its sunken eyes showed confusion, then recognition, then such rage that Carter's courage nearly broke. "Those words are from the old way," it hissed, and Marcus's voice was fracturing now, other voices bleeding through. Victor's rough Swedish accent. A woman's voice, maybe the wife from Chicago. Sophia's voice, weak and distant. All of them trapped in that thing. All of them fuel for the hunger. The old way dies. Everything dies. Everything becomes food. It charged. Carter threw the pouch. It was instinct, desperation, nothing calculated. The leather bag hit the Wendigo's chest and burst, scattering tobacco and ash and dried herbs across the ice. The creature screamed, not with Marcus's voice anymore, but with something inhuman, something that sounded like wind tearing through a corpse, like bones grinding in frozen joints. Where the tobacco touched its skin, steam rose. Or maybe not steam, maybe something between smoke and frost. The physical manifestation of corruption meeting protection. The Wendigo thrashed, clawing at its own chest where the tobacco burned. Its distended stomach convulsed. It vomited onto the ice, and what came up was not food but pieces of people. A wedding ring, a fragment of bone with flesh still clinging to it, a patch of skin with a tattoo visible. Evidence of every person it had consumed, every transformation it had caused or prevented by consuming its victims before they could fully turn. Carter scrambled backward on the ice. The creature was weakening, its movements becoming jerky, uncoordinated. The tobacco had bought him time but not safety. He could see Sophia emerging from the tree line, her transformation more advanced now, her body already too tall, too thin. Soon, there would be two of them. Then more. The curse spreading, he ran again, this time toward the southern shore, away from both creatures. His muscles screamed. His vision tunneled. Behind him, he heard the Wendigo recovering, heard its footsteps resuming pursuit. But slower now. Weakened. Or maybe it was just playing with him, extending the chase, savoring his exhaustion. The shoreline materialized in his headlamp beam. Trees, safety, somewhere to hide. He crashed into the forest and kept moving, no longer following any trail, just fleeing blind through the darkness. Branches tore at his face. His snowshoes caught and released, caught and released. He fell 3 times, got up twice. The third time he stayed down, pressed against a fallen log, breathing so hard he thought his lungs would tear. Silence settled. No pursuit sounds. No footsteps, just the wind and his own ragged breathing, and the steady drip of blood from where a branch had opened his cheek. He waited 5 minutes, 10, his body temperature dropping rapidly now that he'd stopped moving. Hypothermia would kill him soon if the Wendigo didn't find him first. His radio crackled. Carter. Tom's voice, distorted by static but recognizable. Carter, can you hear me? He grabbed the radio. Tom, it's real. Everything you said, I saw it. I know you did. Listen carefully. The old protections work, but only briefly. Tobacco confuses them, makes them vulnerable for a short time. But they adapt. You need to get out of that area immediately. Can you reach the magnetic lake trailhead? I don't know. I'm disoriented. GPS is dead. Sat phone's dead. Everything's dead. They do that. The Wendigo disrupts technology, drains batteries. It's the hunger. It consumes everything, even electricity. You need to navigate by compass and stars. Head south-southwest, 3 miles to the trailhead. I'm sending a team, but they won't arrive before dawn. Dawn was 8 hours away. Carter checked his compass with shaking hands. The needle spun wildly for several seconds before settling on a direction that felt wrong. But wrong was all he had. Tom, there are 2 of them now. Sophia Chen, she's transforming. And the original one? It spoke with Marcus's voice. Marcus Delano, my partner who died 3 years ago in New York. How is that possible? Silence. Then, the Wendigo takes pieces of everyone it consumes. Their memories, their voices, their knowledge. It uses those pieces to hunt more effectively. If it killed your partner, it knows everything Marcus knew. Your fears, your weaknesses, your guilt. It will use all of it. Carter's throat closed. How do I survive? By being what it's not. The Wendigo is hunger without end. You need to be discipline, control. Don't let your fear become panic. Don't let your survival instinct become selfishness. Those are the doors it enters through. Stay human, Carter. That's the only defense. The radio died again, this time with a gurgling sound like someone drowning. Carter was alone. He moved south-southwest according to his compass, each step deliberate, forcing himself to maintain discipline despite the terror clawing at his thoughts. The forest was wrong here. Trees grew at odd angles. The snow reflected his headlamp beam in ways that created faces, reaching hands, watching eyes. Shadows moved independently of their sources. Once he glimpsed something massive in his peripheral vision, but when he turned his head, there was only empty forest. The whispers started around midnight, voices just at the edge of hearing, speaking words he almost recognized. His father's voice, dead 15 years, asking why Carter hadn't visited more before the cancer took him. His ex-wife Julie reminding him of every failure in their marriage. Marcus over and over. Marcus saying Carter's name with such pain and betrayal that each repetition felt like a knife between his ribs. He pushed forward. Stay human. Don't let the guilt consume him. but the voices knew exactly where to cut. "You left me," Marcus whispered from the darkness. "I was your partner, and you froze. You let fear paralyze you, and I suffered for it. Truth. All of it. Truth." Carter had frozen. He'd let Marcus down in the moment it mattered most, and that guilt had rotted inside him for 3 years, had driven him to isolation, had ruined his marriage and his career, and turned him into someone who couldn't sleep, couldn't trust himself, couldn't stop replaying that moment when he should have acted but didn't. The Wendigo was using that guilt. Tom had warned him, "Don't let the fear become panic. Don't let survival instinct become selfishness." But also, Carter realized, don't let guilt become paralysis. Don't let shame immobilize him again. "I failed you," Carter said to the darkness, to Marcus's voice, to his own guilt. "I failed you and I'm sorry. But I can't fail Sophia. Not if there's any chance she can still be saved." The whispers stopped. Carter changed direction, no longer heading toward the trailhead but back toward Disappointment Lake. It was insane. It was suicide. But Tom's grandmother's medicine had hurt the Wendigo. There were protections, old ones that still worked. And maybe, if Sophia's transformation wasn't complete, if some part of her was still human, there was a way to stop it. He had failed Marcus by freezing. He wouldn't fail Sophia by running. The clearing where he'd first seen the Wendigo appeared suddenly, the spruce trees parting like a curtain. The creature was there, crouched in the center, feeding. Carter's headlamp caught details he wished he could unsee. The Wendigo's distended stomach contracting and expanding rhythmically, processing what it had consumed, converting flesh into hunger into the ice that formed its heart. Sophia knelt nearby, no longer hanging in the trees but mobile now, watching the feeding with an expression caught between horror and fascination. Her transformation was nearly complete. Her jaw had finished dislocating. Her fingers were twice their normal length, the joints reversed. But her eyes still held something human, some fragment of consciousness still aware and fighting and screaming silently for help. Carter didn't think. Thinking would make him freeze again. He charged into the clearing, shouting, waving his arms, drawing the Wendigo's attention away from its meal. The creature's head snapped toward him, bits of frozen flesh falling from its teeth, its sunken eyes fixed on him with terrible intelligence. "More food," it hissed in a chorus of voices. Marcus, Victor, the couple from Chicago, others Carter didn't recognize, decades of victims speaking through one throat. "Always hungry, always needing. Join us, Carter. End the pain. Become the hunger." "No," Carter said. His voice shook but held firm. "I choose discipline over hunger, control over chaos, humanity over consumption." The Wendigo laughed, a sound like icicles shattering. "Brave words, but words don't fill the void. Nothing fills the void. We've consumed entire families, Carter. Villages. Nothing satisfies. The hunger only grows." Sophia's head turned toward Carter. Her elongated fingers twitched. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, and from deep in her throat came a sound that might have been his name, or might have been a warning, or might have been a plea. Carter pulled out his emergency flares, 2 of them, the last resort for lost hikers. He'd never used them, never thought he'd need them. The instructions were simple. Strike the cap, point away from face. He struck one, and orange-red light bloomed in the clearing, harsh and chemical and somehow cleansing. The Wendigo recoiled, its gray skin smoking where the light touched it. Not burning exactly, but eroding, as if the flare's light was too human, too technological, too much a product of civilization to exist near something so fundamentally anti-civilized. "Fire," the creature snarled. "Old weapon, but fire consumes itself. What will you do when it dies? Find another way to fight." Carter held the flare high and advanced. The Wendigo retreated step by step, but Sophia didn't move. She knelt in the snow, trembling, her transformation-frozen body caught between what she'd been and what she was becoming. Carter reached her and held the flare close to her face. Her pupils contracted, human response, Human pain from the light. Still human inside somewhere. "Sophia," he said. "Sophia Chen. Fight it. Whatever hunger you're feeling, fight it. Don't let it define you." Her mouth worked. Sounds emerged, fractured and distorted. "Hungry. So hungry. Please." "I know. But hunger is just a signal. It's not you. The person you are is stronger than any appetite. Remember who you are. Remember your family, your life, everything you were before this." The Wendigo circled, staying beyond the flare's light. She's already gone. The moment she tasted flesh, the moment the curse entered her, she was lost. Now she's just suffering while the transformation completes. Let her finish. Let her become. It's mercy. Carter pulled out his second flare but didn't strike it yet. "Tom," he said into his radio, not expecting an answer. "Tom, if you can hear me, I need to know how to break the curse. How to stop a transformation in progress." Static. Then faint. "Can't break it. Only slow it. Keep them human. Keep them remembering. The curse feeds on isolation, on forgetting who you are. As long as she holds on to identity, the transformation can't complete. But Carter, you can't save her. You can only extend her suffering or end it. Those are the only choices. End it. Put Sophia out of her misery. Let her die human rather than become a monster. That was the merciful choice, the rational choice. But it was also the choice that hunger wanted him to make. The Wendigo fed on death, on despair, on the moment when people gave up their humanity. If Carter killed Sophia, even to save her from a worse fate, he'd be participating in the very cycle of violence and consumption that sustained the curse. "No," Carter said. "There's always another choice." He struck the second flare and jammed it into the snow near Sophia. The light formed a barrier, a circle of chemical red that the Wendigo couldn't cross. Then he pulled Sophia to her feet. She was surprisingly light, as if the transformation was hollowing her out, and began walking her south, toward the trailhead, toward help, toward the possibility that maybe Tom was wrong, and some transformations could be interrupted, some curses broken. The Wendigo followed. It stayed just beyond the flare's light, matching their pace, whispering in its chorus of voices. Every person it had killed, every victim it had consumed, all of them speaking together, trying to convince Carter that survival required sacrifice, that the only way he'd make it out was by leaving Sophia behind. And the terrible thing was, they might be right. Sophia's weight was increasing as her body continued changing. Her steps were uncoordinated, her transforming legs not yet adapted to their new length and strength. Carter's exhaustion was nearly absolute. His muscles burned. His core temperature was dropping. The second flare wouldn't last more than 15 minutes, and then they'd be in darkness with something inhuman hunting them. "Why fight?" the Wendigo called. "You know how this ends. Everyone dies in the cold eventually. Give her to us. We'll make it quick. And you can live, Carter. You can return to your cabin, file your report, move on. This doesn't have to be your grave, too." Carter's legs buckled. He fell, taking Sophia down with him. The flare's light was dimming, maybe 5 minutes left. They were still 2 miles from the trailhead. The Wendigo's shadow loomed larger. But then, lights, headlamps, voices shouting. A SAR team emerging from the tree line, Tom Redsky leading them, carrying something that gleamed even in the darkness. A bundle of burning sage, the smoke thick and pungent. "The old medicine," Tom called out. "Strong now, fresh, get behind me." Carter dragged Sophia toward the team. The Wendigo screamed, a sound that shattered the remaining ice in nearby trees, sending a cascade of frozen branches crashing down. It charged Tom, but the sage smoke formed a barrier it couldn't cross. Where the smoke touched the creature's skin, frost formed instantly, immobilizing its joints. "It won't hold long," Tom said. "We need to get her out of here. The transformation will continue unless we can get her somewhere warm, somewhere human, where she can remember who she is." They carried Sophia between them, 6 people in a desperate evacuation while behind them the Wendigo tore free of the smoke and resumed pursuit. But there were more of them now. More lights, more voices, more humanity. The curse fed on isolation. They were giving it the opposite. They reached the trailhead as dawn broke. The Wendigo didn't follow beyond the tree line. It stood at the forest's edge, Marcus's face visible for just a moment before the thing turned and vanished back into the wilderness. But Carter heard its voice one final time, a whisper that might have been imagination or might have been a promise. Hunger never dies, Carter. It waits. And winter always returns. Sophia survived. After 3 weeks in the hospital, after specialists who couldn't explain her injuries, after reconstructive surgery on her jaw and hands, she was released. The official report blamed her condition on severe frostbite and hypothermia-induced hallucinations. The transformation had stopped, or maybe reversed, or maybe was just in remission. She remembered nothing after the 3rd day on the trail. Maybe that was mercy. Maybe that was the curse finding a different way to feed, by taking memory instead of flesh. Carter didn't return to the Boundary Waters. He transferred to a ranger station in Arizona, somewhere warm and dry where winter was brief and the monsters came from different mythologies. But on cold nights he still heard the whispers, still glimpsed Marcus in his peripheral vision, still felt the weight of Tom's warning. Hunger never dies. It waits. He learned to live with it. Learned that some guilt you carry forever, some failures you never atone for, some hungers you never satisfy. The Wendigo had taught him that, but it had also taught him something else, that the moment of choice matters, that freezing isn't inevitable, that humanity isn't the absence of hunger but the discipline to resist it. Some nights, he took out a piece of tobacco Tom had given him before he left Minnesota. He'd light it and let the smoke drift through his Arizona apartment, a small protection against old hungers, a reminder that the ancient defenses still worked, if you remembered to use them. And some nights he'd check the news from the Boundary Waters. Every winter, reports would surface, missing hikers, unexplained disappearances, tracks that started human and became something else. The pattern continued. The curse endured, but so did Carter. So did Sophia. So did everyone who chose to stay human when hunger offered easier alternatives. That had to mean something. That had to count, even if he wasn't entirely sure what he was counting toward. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Marcus Chen had been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 11 years, and in that time he developed an appreciation for patterns. The way morning fog rolled through the Hoh rainforest canopy at predictable intervals, how moss grew thickest on the northern exposure of Sitka spruce trunks, the cyclical migration routes of Roosevelt elk through the river valleys. Nature operated on principles that could be observed, measured, and understood. It was this rational framework that made him good at his job. Searching for lost hikers wasn't about intuition or luck. It was about eliminating variables and following probability maps. On October 23, 2018, that framework began to fail him. The dispatch came through his Motorola radio at 14:47 hours. A solo backpacker named Sarah Mitchell, 29, hadn't checked in at the Hoh River Ranger Station after completing what should have been a 3-day trek along the Hoh River Trail. Her vehicle, a 2015 Subaru Outback, had been parked at the trailhead for 4 days. Marcus acknowledged the call and pulled up her permit information on his laptop. She'd filed plans to hike 18 miles in, set up camp near the junction of Hoh River and Glacier Creek, then return. Experienced hiker according to her permit history. Proper gear list. No medical conditions flagged. He radioed the station to confirm he'd begin the search at first light, assembled his pack with methodical precision. First aid kit, emergency bivvy, water purification tablets, energy bars, headlamp, spare batteries, his Garmin GPS loaded with topographic maps, and set his alarm for 0430. The forecast showed clear weather, temperatures in the low 50s, no precipitation expected. Good conditions for a search and rescue operation. Marcus started up the trail at 0552, his breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn darkness. The beam from his headlamp cut through the gloom, illuminating the iconic tunnel of green that made the Hoh rainforest famous. Enormous Sitka spruces rose like cathedral pillars, their bark thick and deeply furrowed. Big-leaf maples draped in club moss created a canopy so dense that even at midday the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight. Sword ferns carpeted every available surface, and nurse logs, fallen giants slowly returning to soil, sprouted entire ecosystems of hemlock seedlings and fungi. The trail was well maintained but narrow, forcing Marcus to push through wet vegetation that soaked his pants below the knee. He'd covered this route dozens of times, knew every switchback and creek crossing. At the 5-mile mark, he paused to check his GPS and note the time. 07:34. Ahead, the trail climbed gradually alongside the Hoh River, its gray-green waters rushing over rounded stones smoothed by centuries of current. He reached Sarah Mitchell's intended campsite at 10:15. The coordinates from her permit led him to a small clearing 50 yards from the trail, tucked between two massive spruce trees whose root systems created natural benches. He found her tent immediately. It stood fully erected, but its entrance hung open, the zipper pulled down completely. Marcus approached slowly, noting details with the automatic assessment of someone trained to read scenes. No visible damage to the tent fabric, no signs of animal intrusion, no claw marks, no torn nylon. Her backpack sat inside, partially unpacked. Sleeping bag unrolled but not slept in. A camp stove set up on a flat rock, unused. Water bottles full. Food bag hanging properly from a branch 20 feet up, secured with a bear bag technique that spoke of experience. Marcus called out, "Sarah Mitchell, National Park Service." His voice echoed briefly, then died in the sound-absorbing moss. No response. He documented the scene with his camera, taking wide shots and close-ups. What struck him wasn't what was present, but what wasn't. No journal, no phone. Though reception out here was non-existent anyway. No identification. Her driver's license wasn't in the backpack's document pocket where permits were usually kept. The permit itself was gone too. Marcus widened his search pattern, moving in concentric circles around the campsite. At 30 yards out, he found the first track. A footprint pressed into soft soil near the creek bank, distinct enough to identify as a hiking boot, women's size 7 or 8 based on the impression. The tread pattern matched standard Merrell boots. He photographed it, placed a marker, and continued searching. 15 feet further, he found another print. Same boot, same general direction, heading north away from the trail and deeper into the forest. But between the first print and the second, something had changed. The gait was wrong. The stride length was too long, nearly 5 feet between impacts. Sarah Mitchell's permit listed her height as 5'4". No one that size took 5-foot strides while hiking through dense undergrowth. Marcus crouched beside the second print, studying it with growing unease. The impression was deeper at the toe, as if she'd been running. But the angle of the foot placement was off, the weight distribution unusual. He took more photographs, marked the print, and pressed forward. The third track made him stand up quickly and take an involuntary step back. It wasn't a boot print. It was a paw, canine but far too large for any dog he'd ever seen. The pad measured 6 inches across with claw marks extending another 2 inches beyond. The depth of the impression indicated significant weight, easily over 100 pounds. But what made Marcus's pulse quicken was the placement. The paw print was exactly where the next boot print should have been, maintaining the same northward trajectory, the same impossible stride length. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think methodically. Coincidence? Sarah had been running from a wolf or a very large coyote. The tracks overlapped by chance, except wolves had been extinct in this part of Washington for decades, and coyotes didn't grow large enough to leave prints this size. Marcus followed the trail for another 100 yards. The prints continued to alternate. Boot, boot, paw, paw, boot, paw, with no consistent pattern he could identify. Sometimes 3 boot prints in a row, then 2 paw prints, sometimes alternating with each step. In one particularly disturbing sequence, A boot print transitioned mid-stride into a paw print, as if something had changed form between footfalls. The tracks led him to a massive old-growth cedar, its trunk perhaps 15 feet in diameter. Behind the tree, pressed against the bark, he found Sarah Mitchell's jacket. A North Face shell, bright blue, exactly matching the description from her permit. He picked it up carefully, and immediately felt something wrong with the texture. The fabric was intact, no tears or damage, but it was stiff in places, the material dark and stained. Marcus turned it to catch better light and saw what he'd been touching. Blood. Dried to a deep brown, concentrated around the collar and left shoulder, with spray patterns on both sleeves that suggested arterial bleeding. Enough blood that no one could lose that volume and remain conscious, much less continue hiking. He'd done enough searches to know what fatal blood loss looked like. Marcus stood very still, holding the jacket, his mind working through scenarios. Attack by predator. But what predator attacks from the exact angle that would create this pattern? What predator leaves no tissue, no signs of feeding, no drag marks to indicate a kill being moved? Where was the body? He keyed his radio. Dispatch, this is Ranger Chen. Search operation for Sarah Mitchell. Static then. Go ahead, Chen. I've located the subject's campsite and personal effects. Requesting immediate backup and a SAR team. Possible 1054. A pause. Confirm possible deceased? Confirming. Significant blood evidence. Subject status unknown. Copy that. Coordinating response. ETA approximately 4 hours given trail distance. Are you in a secure location? Marcus looked around at the endless cathedral of moss-covered trees, the shadows that seemed to press closer despite the climbing sun. Affirmative. Maintaining position at the site. Understood. Stay on channel. 4 hours. It was 11:43 now, which meant backup wouldn't arrive until nearly 16 Narang. The forest had gone very quiet. Marcus realized he couldn't hear any birds, no Douglas squirrels chattering, none of the ambient wildlife sound that normally provided a constant background texture. Just the distant rush of the river and the whisper of wind through the canopy. He turned to examine the cedar tree more carefully and stopped. Carved into the bark, about 6 feet up, was a symbol he didn't recognize. It looked almost like a pictograph, rendered with something sharp enough to cut through the cedar's thick outer layers. The design showed a figure that was both human and animal simultaneously. A person with the head of a wolf or coyote, arms extended, surrounded by smaller symbols that might have been stars or eyes. The carving wasn't fresh. Sap had begun to darken the exposed wood, suggesting it had been there at least several days, possibly longer. Marcus photographed the symbol from multiple angles. His rational mind tried to categorize it. Some kind of territorial marking, maybe. Trail vandalism. Except this was 20 miles from the nearest road, and the amount of effort required to hike in just to carve symbols seemed unlikely. And the style was too deliberate, too culturally specific to be random graffiti. It reminded him of something, some training he'd had years ago about indigenous cultural sites, but the memory wouldn't surface. He spent the next 90 minutes conducting a systematic search of the area, photographing everything, collecting evidence in paper bags he'd brought for exactly this purpose. The blood-stained jacket, a single boot the matching morel, found 30 yards from the cedar tree, no blood inside but positioned carefully upright on a flat rock as if placed there intentionally. No sign of the second boot. No sign of Sarah Mitchell. The tracks continued beyond the cedar but became increasingly difficult to follow as the ground grew rockier. Marcus tracked them for another quarter mile before losing the trail completely at a section of exposed bedrock along Glacier Creek. The water ran swift and cold, fed by snowmelt from the Blue Glacier several miles upstream. If Sarah, or her body, had entered the creek, the current could have carried her miles downriver. But that didn't explain the alternating tracks. It didn't explain the symbol. It didn't explain the jacket removed so carefully with no other signs of violence at the campsite. Marcus returned to the cedar tree and established a perimeter, marking trees with bright orange flagging tape to guide the SR team. He should have felt relieved that backup was coming, that this would soon be someone else's problem. Instead, he felt exposed, watched. He found himself constantly turning to check over his shoulder, responding to movements at the edge of his vision that resolved into nothing when he looked directly. At 14:20, his radio crackled. "Chen, this is dispatch." "Go ahead." "We've encountered a situation. The SAR team is delayed. There's been a traffic accident on Highway 101, partial road closure. New ETA is approximately 19 hours. Marcus checked his watch, calculated remaining daylight. Sunset was at 18:14. Even with his headlamp, conducting a proper investigation after dark would be nearly impossible. "Copy that. Should I extract and return tomorrow with the team?" A different voice came on the channel, his supervisor, Frank Ramirez. "Chen, what's your current situation? Are you in any immediate danger?" "Negative. Site is secure. No signs of present threats." "Then I need you to stay put and protect the scene until the team arrives. We can't risk having the evidence compromised overnight, and there's a slim possibility Mitchell might still return to her campsite. You have adequate gear for an overnight?" Marcus glanced at his pack. He had his emergency bivvy, food for 2 days, water filtration. "Affirmative." "Good. Set up a cold camp, no fires. Document everything you can while there's still light. We'll get to you as soon as possible." "Understood." The radio clicked off. Marcus stood alone in the growing afternoon shadows, surrounded by trees that had been ancient when Lewis and Clark first crossed this continent. He'd done solo overnight camps dozens of times. It was part of the job. But he'd never done one at a site where someone had likely died violently, leaving behind evidence that made no sense according to any rational framework he could construct. He set up his bivvy 30 yards from Sarah's tent, maintaining a line of sight to both the campsite and the cedar tree with its disturbing symbol. As the afternoon progressed, he photographed everything again from different angles, took precise GPS coordinates, made detailed notes in his waterproof field book. Methodical work, data collection, the kind of systematic documentation that would be valuable in whatever investigation followed. The sun descended toward the western ridge, and the forest's perpetual twilight deepened toward true darkness. Marcus rationed his dinner, a protein bar and some trail mix, and filled his water bottles from the creek after treating them with purification tablets. He was arranging his gear for the night when he heard the sound. A voice. Female. Distant, but clear in the still air. "Help me." Marcus froze, listening. The voice seemed to come from deeper in the forest northwest of his position, perhaps 200 yards away. "Please, someone help me." He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, Chen. I have a possible voice contact with the missing subject." "Chen, confirm you're hearing Sarah Mitchell?" "I'm hearing a female voice calling for help. Stand by." He keyed off, cupped his hands around his mouth. "Sarah Mitchell, this is the National Park Service. Call out your location." Silence. Then, "I'm hurt. I can't move, please." The voice was weak, threaded with pain. Marcus pulled out his Garmin, marked his current position, and activated the trackback feature so he could retrace his route. He grabbed his first aid kit, his flashlight, and started moving toward the voice pushing through the undergrowth. "Keep calling out," he shouted. "I'm coming to you." "Hurry," the voice answered, slightly closer now. "It's getting dark." Marcus crashed through ferns and over nurse logs following the sound. His flashlight beam swept across trees and moss, creating wild shadows. "Keep talking. I'm tracking your voice." "Here," the voice said, now to his right. He corrected course. "I'm here." He covered 100 yards, breathing hard, and stopped in a small clearing. "Sarah, where are you?" "Behind you," the voice whispered directly into his ear. Marcus spun around, his heart hammering. Nothing. Empty forest. He swept his flashlight in a full circle. No one. The voice had been intimate, so close he should have felt breath on his neck. But he was alone. Then he heard it again, the same voice. But now it was ahead of him, perhaps 50 yards distant. "Help me, please." Something was very wrong. Marcus's training tried to assert itself. Auditory hallucinations brought on by stress, echoes creating false directional cues, his own mind playing tricks in the isolation. But the voice was too clear, too distinct, and it had moved from behind him to ahead of him in the span of seconds. "Sarah Mitchell." This is Ranger Marcus Chen with the National Park Service. If you can hear me, I need you to respond to my voice. Stay where you are, do not move toward me, I will come to you, confirm you understand. The voice that answered was wrong. Still female, still Sarah Mitchell's voice as far as he could tell. But the cadence was off, the pronunciation too careful, like someone speaking a language they'd only recently learned. Yes, I understand. I will stay here. Come to me, Marcus Chen. He hadn't given his first name in his introduction, only his last name and title. Marcus took 3 steps backward, his flashlight still pointed toward where the voice had originated. His rational mind was screaming that there had to be an explanation, that stress and isolation were affecting his perception. But another part of him, something older, more primitive, was insisting that he return to his bivvy immediately and wait for backup. The voice came again, now from a completely different direction off to his left. Marcus Chen, come find me. The words were identical in tone and inflection to the previous phrase, as if recorded and played back. Then from his right, come find me, Marcus Chen. Behind him, Marcus Chen. Ahead, find me. The voices were coming from multiple directions simultaneously, all using the exact same female voice, all speaking fragments of the same phrases. It wasn't possible. There wasn't any acoustic phenomenon that could explain this, no way for a human throat to project voice in multiple directions at once. Marcus turned and ran. He crashed back through the undergrowth, following his GPS track back, not caring about the noise he made or the branches whipping against his face. Behind him, around him, the voices continued, a chorus of Sarah Mitchell's calling his name, asking for help, speaking in that too careful cadence that suggested something mimicking human speech rather than producing it naturally. He burst back into the clearing where he'd set up his bivvy and stopped, chest heaving, flashlight beam dancing erratically. His camp was exactly as he'd left it. Sarah's tent sat undisturbed. The forest was quiet again. No voices, no sounds except his own ragged breathing and the distant river. Marcus checked his GPS. He'd traveled approximately 300 yards northwest, then returned. He'd been gone less than 15 minutes. The entire incident had unfolded in a quarter-hour time span that now felt both infinite and impossibly compressed. He keyed his radio with shaking hands. Dispatch, Chen. Static. He tried again. Dispatch, Chen, do you copy? Nothing but white noise. He checked the radio, fully charged battery, antenna intact, power indicator showing green. But no signal, no response. He was 20 miles from the nearest ranger station, and his only communication link had failed. Marcus forced himself to think systematically. Radio failure had multiple possible causes. Atmospheric conditions, though the night was clear. Battery issues, though he'd charged it fully that morning. Equipment malfunction, which was uncommon but possible with the older Motorola units. Or, and he hesitated even thinking this, deliberate interference. But interference from what? Who? He walked slowly to his bivvy and sat down, keeping his flashlight on, pointed toward the tree line. The darkness beyond his small circle of light was absolute. October in the Olympic wilderness meant true darkness, no light pollution, the moon not yet risen. Anything could be out there watching him, and he'd never know until it was close enough to touch. The rational explanation was that Sarah Mitchell had survived whatever attack had bloodied her jacket. She was confused, possibly delirious from blood loss and trauma, wandering the forest calling for help. The alternating tracks could be explained by what? By coincidence. By a predator that had stalked her, left prints that happened to align with her path. The voice coming from multiple directions was an acoustic trick, echoes bouncing off the massive trees in ways that distorted source location. The rational explanation required ignoring the symbol carved into the cedar. It required ignoring the careful placement of the boot. It required ignoring the voice that had spoken directly into his ear when nothing visible stood behind him. Marcus pulled out his field guide to Pacific Northwest flora and fauna, flipping through it with trembling hands until he found the section on indigenous peoples of the Olympic Peninsula. The historical information was brief. The Ho tribe, the Quileute, various Coast Salish groups who had lived in these forests for thousands of years before European contact. Their spiritual traditions weren't detailed in the guide, but there was a footnote reference to transformation stories, legends of people who could wear animal skins and take on animal forms. He remembered the symbol on the cedar tree, the human figure with an animal head. He remembered training he'd received years ago during a cultural sensitivity workshop. There had been a visiting speaker, a tribal elder from somewhere in the southwest. He couldn't recall exactly. The elder had spoken about skinwalkers, about witches who violated sacred taboos and gained the ability to shapeshift. Marcus had filed it away as interesting folklore, the kind of cultural knowledge useful for understanding the historical context of the land, but not practically relevant to his daily work. Skinwalkers were Navajo, he was fairly certain. Not Pacific Northwest tribes, but the basic concept of transformation, of something wearing skins to change form, that appeared in cultures worldwide. What if different traditions were describing the same phenomenon, the same type of entity that existed across geographical boundaries? Marcus closed the field guide and set it aside. He was letting stress and isolation push him into magical thinking. There was no such thing as shapeshifters. There was no such thing as creatures that could mimic human voices and leave impossible tracks. There was a rational explanation for everything he'd observed, and when the SAR team arrived tomorrow, they'd help him piece it together. He pulled his sleeping bag around his shoulders and checked his watch. 1947. The team had been due at 19 Kraarn, but clearly hadn't arrived yet. They'd had to deal with a traffic accident, road closure, delays. They'd get here when they got here. He just had to wait. The hours crawled past. Marcus kept his flashlight on despite the battery drain, unable to tolerate the complete darkness. He tried the radio periodically but got only static. No voices called out from the forest. No sounds at all except the river, and occasionally the wind moving through the canopy high overhead. At 22:33, he saw the first pair of eyes. They appeared at the very edge of his flashlight's range, perhaps 60 yards away, reflecting the beam with a greenish-yellow shine. Animal eyes, definitely, but the height was wrong. They were at least 5 feet off the ground, far too high for a deer or elk. As Marcus watched, they blinked once, then vanished. He swept his flashlight across the tree line. Nothing. Then, 30 degrees to the left, another pair of eyes appeared, same color, same height. They held his gaze for several seconds, then disappeared. The eyes began appearing and vanishing in a pattern that slowly circled his position, never close enough for him to see what body they belonged to, never staying visible long enough for him to get a clear look. Just brief glimpses of reflected light, repositioning around him like pieces on a game board. Marcus stood up, grabbed his pack, and moved to stand with his back against Sarah's tent. If something was circling, he wanted an obstruction behind him. His hand found the canister of bear spray on his belt. Capsaicin derivative, effective range of 30 feet, proven deterrent for aggressive wildlife. Would it work on something that might not be normal wildlife? The eyes appeared again, much closer this time, maybe 40 feet away. They were accompanied by a sound, breathing, but wrong. Too wheezy, too wet, like air being pulled through fluid-clogged passages. The sound moved left, circling, and the eyes disappeared and reappeared to match the movement. Then he heard the footsteps. Not quite like any animal gait he recognized. There was a rhythm to them. 4 beat at first, paw fall, paw fall, paw fall, paw fall, then shifting mid-stride to 2 beat, step, step. Like watching something transition between quadrupedal and bipedal movement in real time. The eyes appeared directly in front of him, maybe 25 feet away. Close enough that his flashlight caught a glimpse of the body below them. It stood upright on 2 legs, but the posture was wrong. The spine curved in a way human anatomy didn't allow. The arms too long and ending in hands that looked more like paws. The head was the worst part. A canine skull stretched over with skin that didn't fit properly, bunched and wrinkled in places, too tight in others. The jaw hung partially open, revealing teeth that were too large, too numerous, overlapping each other in multiple rows. Marcus raised his bear spray, his hand steady despite the terror trying to lock his muscles. Get back! His voice came out stronger than he felt. I'm armed. The thing tilted its head with jerky, segmented movements, like a bird examining something curious. When it spoke, it used Sarah Mitchell's voice. Marcus Chen, I found you. It took a step forward. Its leg bent backward at the knee, then forward, the joint seeming to work in both directions simultaneously. The foot that touched ground was a paw, 5-toed with thick claws, but the ankle was wrapped in something that looked like cloth or leather strips. Marcus triggered the bear spray. The stream shot out in a cone, catching the creature directly in the face. It recoiled, making a sound like grinding metal, and retreated backward into the darkness beyond his flashlight. The eyes vanished. Silence returned, broken only by his hammering pulse. The canister had maybe one more good burst left. He hadn't expected to use any tonight. Minutes passed. 10, maybe 15. Marcus kept his back to the tent, his flashlight sweeping constantly, looking for any movement. His mind was racing through impossibilities, trying to reconcile what he'd seen with any rational framework, and failing completely. Then Sarah Mitchell walked out of the forest. She looked exactly like her permit photo, 5'4" athletic build, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing hiking pants and a gray fleece. No blood on her clothes, no signs of injury. She walked normally, human locomotion, arms swinging naturally at her sides. She stopped about 15 feet from Marcus and smiled. "Thank God you found me," she said. Her voice was perfect this time, no odd cadence or careful pronunciation. "I got so lost. Something attacked my camp and I ran. I've been wandering for days." Marcus kept his flashlight trained on her, his depleted bear spray canister still raised. "Stay where you are, don't come any closer." Sarah's smile faltered. "What's wrong?" "I'm okay. I just need help getting back to the ranger station." "What's your mother's name?" Marcus asked. Sarah, or the thing wearing Sarah's appearance, tilted its head exactly the same way the creature had moments before. "What?" "Your mother's name. It's on your emergency contact form. Tell me her name." The Sarah thing's smile returned, but it was wrong now, too wide, showing too many teeth. "You're being silly. I'm Sarah. I need your help." "Tell me your mother's name." The smile stretched wider, impossibly wide, the jaw beginning to distend like a snake's. "Come help me, Marcus Chen. Come find me." Then it dropped to all fours and rushed forward with inhuman speed. Marcus dove sideways, rolling toward the cedar tree with the carved symbol. The thing that had been Sarah overshot him, crashing into her own tent with enough force to collapse the structure. It emerged from the wreckage snarling, a sound that was part human scream, part animal growl, part something else entirely. Marcus scrambled behind the cedar tree, putting the massive trunk between himself and the creature. It circled left. He circled right, keeping the tree between them. It moved faster, trying to catch him, but Marcus matched its movement, the cedar providing sanctuary. The creature stopped, breathing heavily. When it spoke again, it used his own voice. "Marcus Chen is trapped." Perfect inflection, perfect tone. It was learning. Then it began to climb. Marcus heard the claws scraping bark as it scaled the cedar with the agility of a squirrel. It was going to come over the top, drop down on him from above. He abandoned the tree and ran toward the creek, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly, illuminating fragments of forest, ferns, moss, branches, the rushing water ahead. He hit the creek bank at full speed and didn't slow down, plunging into the current. The water was shockingly cold, fed by glacial melt, deep enough to reach his waist. The current immediately pulled at him, trying to sweep him downstream. He fought across, arms churning, boots finding purchase on rounded stones, slipping, catching, pushing forward. Behind him, he heard the splash as the creature entered the water. It was following. Of course it was following. Marcus reached the far bank and pulled himself out, water streaming from his clothes, already shivering from cold that cut through to his bones. He scrambled up the steep bank, grabbing roots and ferns for handholds, hauling himself to level ground. He risked a glance back. The creature was in the middle of the creek, crouched in the current, its form shifting and rippling like it couldn't decide what shape to hold. As Marcus watched, it seemed to melt and reform, the canine features sliding away and being replaced by something more human, more Sarah Mitchell before shifting back to the hybrid form. Then it spoke in a voice Marcus recognized, his own voice, but older, wiser, his supervisor, Frank Ramirez. "Chen, return to the site immediately. That's a direct order." Marcus turned and ran. The forest on this side of the creek was denser, the undergrowth thicker. He pushed through it blindly, following the creek downstream because it was the only navigation he had. His GPS was somewhere back at the cedar tree, along with most of his gear. He had his flashlight, his utility knife, his radio that didn't work, and the clothes that were now soaking wet and leaching heat from his body at an alarming rate. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs threatened to give out, until he couldn't run anymore and collapsed against a massive hemlock trunk. His flashlight was dimming, the battery dying. He turned it off to conserve power, plunging himself into darkness so complete he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. In the darkness, he heard it moving through the forest, not trying to be quiet anymore. Branches snapping, undergrowth thrashing. It was hurting him, he realized, pushing him somewhere specific. Away from the trail, away from help, deeper into territory where no one would find him. Marcus forced his exhausted brain to work. Skinwalkers, if that's what this was, had rules in the legends, weaknesses. What were they? He tried to remember the training session, the elders' words. Something about names having power, something about tobacco being sacred, something about ash. Ash, white ash specifically, used in protection rituals. Marcus looked up at the tree he was leaning against. Hemlock, not ash. But ash trees grew in this forest. He just had to find one. He turned on his flashlight, cupping the lens to reduce the visible glow. The beam was weak now, orange-tinged instead of white. He had maybe 15 minutes of light left. He started moving again, examining every tree, looking for the distinctive compound leaves and diamond-patterned bark of Oregon ash. The creature's sounds continued, always maintaining the same distance, sometimes ahead of him, sometimes behind, sometimes paralleling his movement. It was playing with him. The thought made him furious. This thing had killed Sarah Mitchell, probably had killed other hikers over years or decades, and now it was toying with its prey like a cat with a mouse. Marcus found an ash tree after 10 minutes of desperate searching. It was young, maybe 20 feet tall, the bark smooth and pale. He pulled out his utility knife and began carving shavings, collecting them in his trembling hands. He carved a symbol into the trunk, a crude version of a medicine wheel he remembered from the cultural training. 4 directions, circle connecting them. He had no idea if it would do anything, if he was even remembering the right protective symbolism, but it was action, and action felt better than passive waiting for death. He collected ash bark and stuffed it into his pockets. Then he smeared wet ash across his face, his neck, his hands. If there was any power in this, any truth to the old legends, maybe it would provide some protection. His flashlight died completely, the beam fading to black mid-sweep. The darkness swallowed him whole. Marcus stood absolutely still, listening. The forest was silent. No movement. No creature sounds. Even the wind had died. It was the kind of silence that preceded violence, the held breath before the strike. Then he heard Sarah Mitchell's voice, very close, speaking softly like she was standing right beside him. "Marcus, I know what you're trying to do. It won't work. The old ways don't hold power here anymore. This is my forest now." Something touched his shoulder. Not a hand. The texture was wrong, too rough, too hairy. Marcus spun away from the touch, slashing with his knife, hitting nothing. He backed up against the ash tree, the rough bark pressing into his spine. "Your people came to this land and forgot the old agreements," the voice continued, still in Sarah's tone, but speaking words that felt ancient. "Forgot what lived here before your trails and your permits and your rangers. We were here first. We are here still. And we are hungry." The touch came again, this time on his left arm. A claw traced slowly down from his shoulder to his elbow, not cutting but definitely present. Marcus slashed again with his knife and this time connected with something solid. The creature screamed, a sound that started as Sarah Mitchell's voice and deteriorated into a noise no human throat could produce. Marcus ran again, using his hands to feel for trees, moving by touch and terrible luck through pitch-black forest. He had no idea which direction he was going, no idea if he was moving toward help or deeper into danger. He just knew he had to keep moving. He ran for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes before his foot caught on a root, and he went down hard, the impact driving air from his lungs. He lay on the forest floor, chest heaving, completely disoriented in the darkness. His utility knife had fallen from his hand. He groped around frantically, trying to find it, fingers sweeping through moss and ferns. The creature was very close now. He could hear it breathing, that same wet, labored sound. He could smell it. A stench like old meat and wet dog overlaid with something sharp and chemical that burned his nose. Marcus Chen, it said, and now it was using his dead father's voice, speaking Mandarin. Come here, son. Let me help you. Marcus's hand closed around his knife handle. He pulled it close, held it ready. He wouldn't go down without a fight. Even if the ash hadn't worked, even if the symbol had been meaningless, he wouldn't just surrender to this thing. The breathing grew closer. He could feel presence mass heat radiating in the cold night. The creature was right there, inches away, about to strike. Then, from the distance, he heard a sound that made him want to weep with relief. Helicopters. The distinctive whop-whop-whop of rotor blades cutting air. And voices, human voices, calling through the forest. The SAR team had finally arrived. The creature heard it too. Its breathing changed, became more rapid, more agitated. Then there was a sound of movement, of something large retreating quickly through the undergrowth. Within seconds, Marcus was alone. He waited, listening to the helicopters grow closer, listening to the search teams coordinating over loudspeakers. He wanted to call out, but his voice wouldn't work. He lay on the forest floor, covered in ash and creek water and terror, and waited for rescue. They found him 45 minutes later, 2 miles from where he'd established his bivvy. The helicopter's searchlight swept across the forest, and one of the ground team members literally tripped over him. Marcus didn't resist as they wrapped him in a thermal blanket, didn't protest as they checked his vitals and asked him questions he couldn't quite process. They extracted him to a clearing where the helicopter could land. As they lifted him into the aircraft, Marcus looked down at the forest below, the endless dark canopy of ancient trees. The searchlight swept across the terrain, and for just a moment he saw something moving at the edge of the light. Something large and wrong, watching the helicopter with eyes that reflected green-yellow. Then they were climbing, gaining altitude, and the forest fell away below. They took him to Olympic Medical Center in Port Angeles. He was treated for hypothermia and mild shock, given warm fluids and heated blankets, kept overnight for observation. The next morning, Frank Ramirez came to his room with 2 investigators from the NPS and a detective from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department. Marcus told them everything. He showed them the photographs on his camera, Sarah's abandoned camp, the blood-stained jacket, the alternating tracks, the symbol carved in the cedar. He told them about the voices, the creature, his flight through the forest. He watched their expressions shift from concern to doubt, to carefully maintained professional neutrality. The helicopter crew reported that you were disoriented and suffering from exposure, Ramirez said carefully. That's consistent with the symptoms of hypothermia, confusion, hallucinations, irrational behavior. I wasn't hallucinating, Marcus said. I saw it. I photographed the evidence. One of the investigators cleared his throat. We examined the site this morning, Ranger Chen. We found your bivvy, Sarah Mitchell's tent, the jacket. But the tracks you photographed, they appear to be from 2 different animals, probably a coyote and a large dog that someone was hiking with illegally. The pattern of overlap seems to have been coincidental. And the symbol on the tree? Marcus demanded. Old carving. We consulted with the Ho tribe's cultural liaison. It's not from any tradition they recognize, probably someone's attempt at creating indigenous-looking art. The carving is at least several weeks old based on sap accumulation. What about Sarah Mitchell? What about the blood? The detective spoke up. We're treating this as a missing person case with strong evidence of foul play. The amount of blood on the jacket suggests a serious injury. We have cadaver dogs working the area, but the wilderness is extensive. It could take weeks to conduct a thorough search. They asked him more questions. About his mental state, about whether he'd been taking any medications, about his sleep patterns in the days before the incident. Marcus could see where it was going. They were building a narrative where stress and isolation had caused a psychological break, where he'd seen things that weren't there and invented a monster to explain evidence that had more mundane explanations. I'm not crazy, he said quietly. No one is saying you are. Ramirez replied, but you've been under a lot of stress, this search, the responsibility, the isolation. It affects people. We're going to recommend you take some time off. See a counselor. Process what happened. They placed him on administrative leave. Mandatory psychological evaluation. Paid, but with the strong suggestion that he consider whether ranger work was still right for him. Marcus moved through the next few weeks in a daze. He attended counseling sessions where he carefully avoided mentioning the creature, instead focusing on more acceptable trauma, finding evidence of violence, being stranded overnight, experiencing equipment failures. His counselor nodded and made notes and prescribed medication for anxiety and sleep disturbances. He researched skinwalkers obsessively, reading every account he could find online. Navajo traditions, yes, but also similar entities in cultures worldwide. The European werewolf, the Japanese kitsune, the Brazilian boto, shapeshifters wearing skins, violating taboos, hunting humans. Always the same basic pattern. Something that was human once, that chose darkness, that gained the ability to wear other forms. In December, a hiker found Sarah Mitchell's body. She was 11 miles from her campsite at the bottom of a ravine, partially covered by recent snowfall. The autopsy determined cause of death was trauma from the fall, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. The official conclusion was that she'd become disoriented, wandered off trail in darkness or fog, and fallen. The blood on her jacket was explained as coming from a scalp laceration sustained during the fall. The fact that she'd somehow removed the jacket before dying wasn't addressed in the report. Marcus attended her memorial service. Her mother was there, looking hollow-eyed and devastated. Marcus wanted to tell her the truth, that something had hunted her daughter, something old and terrible that still lived in those forests. He said nothing. He was cleared to return to work in January 2019, but he submitted his resignation instead. He moved to Seattle, took a job doing data analysis for a tech company. Spreadsheets and computers and fluorescent lights. Nothing supernatural about office work, but sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, he would pull up satellite images of the Olympic National Park. He would zoom in on the Hoh rainforest, following the river, finding that cedar tree if he looked carefully enough. And he would wonder about the other missing persons cases from that region, the hikers who vanished without a trace, the unexplained disappearances that went back decades. In the old stories, skinwalkers were created when a person violated sacred taboos, usually by murdering a family member in a specific ritual. They gained power but lost their humanity, becoming trapped in a cycle of hunting and killing. They were almost impossible to destroy. They could live for centuries, and they were always hungry. Marcus never went back to the Olympic wilderness. He never went hiking anywhere alone, and whenever he saw someone who reminded him of Sarah Mitchell, the same build, the same dark hair, he had to resist the urge to ask them questions only the real person would know. Just to be sure, just to be absolutely certain, because he'd learned something in that forest, something that no amount of counseling or medication could make him forget. The old things weren't gone. They were just waiting in the places humans rarely went, in the deep forests and the long shadows, waiting for the next person who wandered too far from the trail, waiting to wear new skins. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.